Jesus said, "Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." Wait, what? Did I hear that correctly? I thought the fourth commandment says, honor your father and mother. What's going on here? Because it sounds extreme. But let's look back to a few verses before this section of chapter 10 of the Gospel of St. Matthew, and I think the context will make this clear. At the beginning of chapter 10, Jesus calls the 12 apostles, calls them by name, and then empowers them with his authority to go and do the things that Jesus does, driving out demons, healing the sick. They're working miracles just as Jesus did, in his name, not by their own power, not by their own authority, but in the name and the power and authority of Jesus. So they're the beginning. That's the beginning of the church. And they are acting as the body of Christ, as the church is called to do in the world, to do God's good work in this world. We actually heard this gospel 2 weeks ago. So far, so good. But then Jesus warns his disciples to expect resistance, expect rejection, expect to be persecuted. Jesus told them, "Behold, I am sending you like sheep among wolves." Jesus is basically telling them, I was persecuted, so you should be aware of this. You will also be persecuted. And that's what we know about the apostles. They were persecuted, and all of them, except for St. John the apostle, all of them suffered martyrdom. St. John suffered abuse and imprisonment. The others gave their lives. They indeed put Christ first, above everything, above their families and above their own lives. And part of the reason Jesus is so controversial is because he is making a bold claim about being the Messiah. It had been the long-awaited Messiah. There had been lots of prophecies. Everybody was aware of that. And so first, to declare himself the Messiah is one thing, and there were many pretenders to be in the Messiah, but that is restoring the royal line of King David. It's a big deal. And in the minds of a lot of people, they thought it would mean a political overthrow of the Roman Empire. It wasn't that. But they didn't understand that, and so just saying he's a Messiah and his understanding of what that is was different than a lot of people, so he's controversial that way. But he also declared himself to be God, the Son of God. And many just could not accept. That sounded like blasphemy. Who would say that they are God? What, are you crazy? So Jesus was the cause of division among many of the Jewish families that he's proclaiming the good news to, the hope of Israel. Some members of Judaism did accept Jesus as the Messiah and that he was the Son of God. The apostles, for example, and many others. Their first group of disciples were all Jewish people. They saw that or embraced that connection between Jesus and the prophecies. But others would have nothing to do with Jesus. They did not accept those connections. Furthermore, some thought that Jesus would actually be of harm to their faith and that he was a problem who needed to be eliminated. Therefore, as a matter of full disclosure, Jesus is telling his disciples to be prepared for this. Brother will hand over brother to death, and the father will hand over his child. Children will rise up against parents and have them put to death on account of his name, on account of being a follower of Christ. And then the religious authorities were the ones who would be bringing foment to this and promoting this notion of the controversy with Jesus. Not all of them. There were some who were interested in what Jesus had to say, thought he should get a fair hearing, but others who were dead against him from the very beginning and plotted for his arrest and eventually to put him to death. Therefore, Jesus is telling his followers, and he's very honest and upfront about this, don't be surprised when you're persecuted, when you're going to be treated the same way I have been treated. But he's also consoling him, and this is all leading up to today's section from chapter 10. He said also, we heard this last Sunday, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid of those who can kill the body, but they cannot kill the soul. He lets his apostles know that they are loved, and he will give them strength to live by those convictions. And he's issuing these warnings. As he's issuing warnings, he's also offering words of encouragement. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a small coin? Yet not one of them falls to the ground without your Father knowing it. Even all the hairs of your head have been counted, he tells them. So do not be afraid. You are worth more than a flock of sparrows. Only someone who really loves you cares how many hairs you have on your head. But Jesus is telling them that you need to remain faithful. You need to remain faithful no matter what the cost. So, with all of this background, with all of this understanding of the risk they're taking as they're doing his work, that's where he says to them that if you're going to embrace Jesus, me as the Messiah, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. If your father or mother says, don't believe that guy. Or whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. He's asking us to center ourselves on Christ, to be faithful to Christ. In other words, he's saying, I'm teaching a whole new understanding of what they were expecting for a Messiah, what Israel was expecting for a Messiah. It's always been in God's mind, but as it was revealed, Jesus is the fulfillment of that, and he comes as the Son of God. And he builds on the prophecies that he's able to identify for them, all the prophecies in the Old Testament and the Hebrew Scriptures. And that Jesus is the fulfillment of all those prophecies as the Messiah by God becoming human. But not everyone will accept that, so don't be surprised. And then Jesus adds, and whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. In other words, you may lose a lot in this. Your family may not speak to you anymore. But if you follow me, you will discover the fullness of life. And also with a hope that in time they will embrace the fullness of the picture, the big picture that Christ is offering. He's God. Of course, he's the one who knows what reality is about. Now, we might see this lived out a little bit in our own way, in our own lives. And I'll give you some simple examples that are not so controversial, and then some that are a little more difficult. We already live by such a commitment when, here's one example, when I was a brand new pastor, first time being a pastor at All Saints Parish. And I had on my calendar a plan to join my family for a fishing vacation. I was really looking forward to it. But there was a crisis. It just happened to blow up in the parish, and I just couldn't be away. I needed to be there at the helm. I was the pastor. There was no other pastor. And so out of service to God and my parish that he's placed in my care, I just couldn't be at the family event. I had to place Christ above my family. It makes sense. Or here's another example. My brother Bob and his wife Anna, they could not be present in Eugene when my whole family gathered together to celebrate our parents' 50th wedding anniversary. That's a big deal. Why wouldn't they be there? Well, because they were on the verge of bringing their first daughter into the world. And they were probably weeks away, and their doctor deemed it unsafe to leave home in case Anna went into labor. Now, that wasn't just a practical matter. They were also operating out of their sacrament of holy matrimony. That union is their way of being in union with God. That's how the sacrament works. And so they put their sacrament, their marriage, and the fruit of that marriage, their daughter yet to be born, ahead of the extended family. Understandable. But I also know people who, when they chose to become Catholic, their family, who had prejudicial attitudes about Catholics, it caused a lot of conflict. And some of the family were arguing with them. How could you do that? Some who were also might be consider themselves Christians said, how can you leave the Christian faith to become a Catholic? You know, obviously they don't understand. But that happens. That happens because they don't understand why and how Catholicism is the fullest expression of Christianity. But their family member does, and they choose to serve Christ as a Catholic. And it comes between them and their families. And this is a case also of people who were pastors or have been pastors in Protestant churches, and then they choose to become Catholic. And it causes a lot of conflict. They have to leave their job. That's their livelihood. That's the way they're supporting their family. They're putting a lot on the line to say, I'm choosing to follow Christ as a Catholic. And they sacrifice a lot. But they say, I've come to the awareness that the fullest expression of Christianity is in Catholicism. And so they embrace that. And they, against all other things, against all costs, they do what they feel called by Christ to do. I also know a woman who became a religious sister, and her family disowned her. They were so opposed to Catholicism, first it was bad enough to become a Catholic, but then to become a religious sister. They just couldn't understand it. But she put Christ first. So sometimes it's lived that way. And Bishop Robert Barron just published a new book on something you may already be aware of, but the persecutions of Christians throughout the world in our own day. The title is, What Do Their Deaths Demand? Christian Persecution Today. And you may be surprised to hear of that active persecution of Christians in some parts of the world, and where people are putting their lives on the line. Sometimes more subtly in political ways, like in Vietnam and India, but then sometimes in violent ways, like in Iraq, where churches were bombed. Now, hopefully we don't have to make that kind of a choice in our own life, but I think it's very important for us to be aware of these things, because especially for these two reasons. We need to respect and appreciate all that the apostles and those early church martyrs and many, many saints risked. They risked everything to form the church, to be about the mission of the gospel. We stand on their shoulders. They risked everything. And sometimes we don't think about that. I think it's important to be conscious of that and to revere that sacrifice. I love celebrating the Feasts of Martyrs for that reason, what they did for the sake of passing on the faith. The second reason, though, is this awareness helps us to recognize our need to make Christ the absolute priority in our life. There's no such thing as priorities. It's supposed to be a singular word. What is the priority? It's the priority of Christ, to be center in our lives and above all other things. If we do that, then Christ will teach us how best to love our families. We'll love our families even better than we think we do if we put our family first. We'll love our children even better if we put Christ first in our lives and in their lives. We'll be better at our work if we put Christ first and rather than our jobs first. This is a call of discipleship that Christians have lived by for millennia. And it's a call to us too. So it's good to be conscious of that. Hopefully we don't have to make a big sacrifice that way, but we do need to live the gospel authentically. Our parish here has been committed to that for 135 years. We've been a parish since 1891. We were on First and East Street for a long time, but 135 years living the gospel here, and we stand on their shoulders. And then 70 years ago, this past week on June 24th, we marked the dedication, 70 years of the dedication of the new church, 70 years ago. And we stand on their shoulders too. They made sacrifices for that so that we could have that church. And now it's come to a time when we need to upgrade that for things because it's aging and it needs a lot of work. And so we're doing all those things and we're making sacrifices, but not just for ourselves, for future generations. We benefit from these generations before us and their efforts. And now we're called to put Christ first in our own day and live by these principles and by the light of Christ. So as we step into our own moment of history right now, may we continue to resolve to put Christ first in our lives. May we also resolve to form a community of faith that's united in this enterprise of following Jesus, so that for the sake of generations yet to come, not just our own generation, but generations yet to come. And may we resolve to form our families in the gospel, so that as families, we all put Christ first and live authentically as Jesus called his apostles to.